Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Ink and Fig. My name is Alex, and today we are doing my 2022 Book Awards. I'm so excited to finally get into this and talk about all of the books that I read this year because I had my best reading year ever in 2022. I'm so proud of myself, honestly. I read 48 books in 2022, and that is just unprecedented for me. I only just got back into reading over the pandemic, and like to already be able to do that much in 1 year is a really big deal for me. Jumping right into it, we're going to be starting with the best mystery. I read, I think, about 3 mysteries in 2022, and definitely the best one out of all of them was The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman. This book follows 4 elderly folks who live in a retirement community who have set up this club where they go and talk about murders. Hence the name of the first book in the series, The Thursday Murder Club. They meet on Thursdays and talk about murder. Like, this sounds like the best way to retire, if you ask me. The Man Who Died Twice follows their story as they move on from the events of the Thursday Murder Club and encounter some new challenges, some old challenges that have come back to haunt us. This is one of those ones where the last page really got me. If you're looking for a good murder, if you're looking for something to make you feel good, something to make you think about life and about aging and about what the possibilities and limitations may and may not be in regards to aging, this is definitely a book I would recommend that you check out. I have the third book, and I'm so excited to read it in 2023, to be completely honest with you. Love this book so, so much. Our next category is Best Sci-Fi. I read a surprising amount of sci-fi over 2022. It was sort of one of those genres that I don't read as much as I think I do, but I did have enough to actually be able to choose a contender this year, and the book that I chose is The Memory Librarian by Janelle Monáe. Now, this was a very interesting book because it's not actually a novel. It's a series of 5 short stories all set in the same universe. So we've got 5 short stories, and they were all done in collaboration with 5 other authors. So our other authors, pardon me, I'm going to read their names because I can't remember them all off the top of my head, were Alaya Dawn Johnson, Danny Lore, Eve L. Ewing, Johanka Delgado, and Cherie Renee Thomas. So overall, 6 authors collaborated on this book, Janelle Monáe being the common thread between them, and each of the stories just had so much layered depth and meaning and gave so much to the world that she was trying to build. I hope that we get more from this universe because I feel like there's so much to delve into here in terms of active and passive resistance, being oneself as a means of resistance, challenging structures of power and becoming something that the system hates, but then living that as your truth. And I absolutely love that. And I don't think that this book could have been any better. It was super black. It was super queer. Just, it was such a joy to read. And I think I might end up rereading this at some point because I think that there's still a lot more that I can get out of it, even though I've already read it once. So moving on to the best fantasy. The best fantasy, I unfortunately no longer have the book in my possession because I had to give it back to the library, but I have to pick Nona the Ninth. This book slapped so hard. It was completely different from Gideon and Harrow in a lot of ways, in that it was a lot less memey. So if you've read Gideon and Harrow, you know Tamsin Muir's penchant for jokes and memes and, butt jokes, basically. And this book had way less of that. It was very real world. It was very bare bones in a way, and sort of like a gritty, down into the meat of the story kind of way. It flowed so well. This was the fastest I've ever read a Tamsin Muir book. I think it took me 4 or 5 days, and it just flowed so beautifully. And like, Nona was amazing. I loved her so much. And Noodle was amazing. I loved him so much. Him and his six leggies. Oh my god, just everything about Nona was so good. Definitely, if you haven't read the Locked Tomb series, I highly recommend that you start. It's a big, voluminous, hard-hitting story about some pretty serious sort of philosophy of being kind of questions to it. But it's also just a romp. Like, again, there's a lot of butt jokes, there's a lot of memes. It doesn't take itself too seriously, even though it's talking about some pretty serious things. Definitely start it and then get to Nona as quickly as you can, because honestly, this was just such a fun book. I enjoyed every second of it. The next category I'm going to be looking at is Best Graphic. So this kind of goes into a couple things. This is going to encompass graphic novels, comic books, and manga, because between them, I didn't read enough to be able to choose like a best manga, because I read one. Best comic, I had two, technically I had three options, but two of them were the same book, just in a different language. And then graphic novel, I did actually have two other entries, so I lumped it all together and picked my favorite. And of those, my favorite is Mooncakes. Was it a perfect story? No. Were there plot holes? Yeah, absolutely. Was the diction a little bit strange sometimes? Yeah, but it was lovely. It was fun. It made me feel good about, you know, being alive, which I think is something that books can do for you that we don't talk about enough, is when something really makes you feel alive. And that's what this book did for me. I loved how queer it was. I loved the art style. I went into it for the animal companions, and I was not disappointed. We had so many gorgeous, gorgeous magical creature designs in this book. I just could not get over it. Like, the whole magical menagerie was just mind-blowing. I honestly just enjoyed this book. Like, it wasn't perfect, but it gave really high enjoyment value, and I think that's why it is my favorite graphic. So, one of my major 2022 goals was to read more poetry. Now, once again, I do not have this book on me, but I have chosen Gumbo Yaya by Oriel Marie. One of the reasons that I like reading poetry is because I can just jam through it in a day and be like, all right, cool, yeah, we made it. But like with Marie's work, we really have to sit back and like absorb it, because it's an extremely timely piece. It's discussing things like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and what it is to exist as a Black person, a Black woman, or a Black genderqueer person in the current political climate, and just in the current, you know, state of North America and the world, where society is so heavily weighted against you that like it's hard to exist, and it's hard to exist without running off of rage. And I think that rage was a big motivator behind a lot of the poems in this book, and I felt it. It was so well communicated in the poetry that like I had to take a step back. Like, after every poem, I had to like sit and breathe and think about it and really pull it into myself and sort of synthesize the information that I was getting. And it was beautiful. I truly think rage can be beautiful, and this is one of those pieces that really highlighted that for me. So if you're looking for some really hard-hitting poetry, definitely give Gumbo Yaya a shot. The next one I can actually show you. So I'm going to be going into the best nonfiction. I actually read quite a few of these this year, and I was really proud of myself, because like nonfiction is another one of those genres that I don't really get into that often. But I think of all the ones that I read this year, my favorite one is Embers by Richard Wagamese. This is a collection of the notes and thoughts that Wagamese had when he did his morning meditations. So he would always do his meditation in the morning with a notebook and a pen next to him so that he could write down anything that came to mind, which is just a great practice if you're meditating anyway, because you can come up with some wild stuff while you're trying to empty your mind. It just comes up with like the weirdest thoughts. And sometimes some of the most profound thoughts, which is really what happened with Embers. I read this, and every thought was just so nakedly honest. Like, we talked about like the environment, we talked about spirituality, we talked about what it means to be a good person. We talked about baseball. like it, Meditation can bring you any number of weird and wonderful things, and that's really what this book showed. I think, unfortunately, what adds a lot of value to this book is the fact that Richard Wagamese has since passed away. So these thoughts are a very impactful thing that he has left behind for the world, and the fact that he published these for us, I think, is honestly to everybody's benefit. If you want to have a book that can help you meditate, I think this book would actually help you. Just like read one of these, get into your meditation zone, and just like think it through for yourself. Like, there's some really profound thoughts about the world in here, and I highly recommend this for anybody who is interested in that kind of thing. So now we're moving into the best literary fiction. Literary fiction has always been one of my favorite genres. I read quite widely through literary fiction, and to that end, I actually kind of have to admit that I have a tie in this category between two books that are very different, but that I think impacted me in two very different ways. And those books are Earthlings by Sayaka Murata and This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mahtar and Max Gladstone. These books really could not be any different. The thing that ties them together is the quality of their writing. Earthlings, as with everything I've read from Murata, is just a heart-poundingly real, dirty, gritty view at what happens when society leaves you behind. Like, this book struck me very profoundly. We talked a lot about child abuse and child neglect and how that can turn into kids making their own decisions about things they should not be making their own decisions about. Major content warnings for this book, including, again, child abuse, child neglect, underage sex, underage sexual assault, cannibalism. There's a lot of really heavy, gross things in here, but it's all very heavy and gross for a reason. Like, society absolutely left the main character of this book behind, and she had to figure it out for herself, and she did the best she could. And this was a gorgeous read, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who has the stomach for the aforementioned and other content warnings. This one, on the other hand, we are following two individuals who are on opposite sides of the Time War. We have red and we have blue. To boil it down and to be kind of reductive about it, it is a sapphic romance, but it is so much more than that. It discusses the balance of life and the small things in life and the stuff that makes that up and is hidden in it. One thing that I've seen a lot of criticism on this about is that, like, there's a lot of far-fetched content in here, like, how can you hide love letters in, you know, X, Y, and Z? And frankly, to me, that absolutely rings true. I told this story before, but I'm gonna say it again. When I was at the University of Calgary, we had an instructor named Professor Christian Book. He, in my first year of university, wrote a poem using DNA, which became a brand new life form. That being was poetry. And because I have that experience under my belt, everything in here totally struck me as true and plausible, and it was very easy to accept that you can hide love letters and things as they did in this book, because I have seen it done. The writing in this book was outstanding. I can only hope in my life to one day reach the quality of writing that was in this book. Like, this heavy contender for best book of the year. Absolutely incredible. Loved this. So now I'm going to move on from the genres into some of the best books that made me feel different emotions. I think that the funniest book I read in 2022 was actually Naturally Tan by Tan France. I read this back before I started my YouTube channel in like February of last year, so you haven't seen me read this, but I enjoyed every second of this. This really felt like sitting down for like a spilling all of the tea session with your BFF. Like, The voice in this was fantastic. He himself is just such a no-nonsense hard hitter. He'll say exactly what's on his mind, and I love that in a person. And like just the way he says it is so funny. So like I laughed out loud numerous times while reading this. There was also a lot of heavy content about stuff like racism, homophobia, you know, the kinds of stuff that a young South Asian gay man would experience growing up in the UK. Like, you can't gloss over it. It's gonna happen. Struggles with like dealing with the TSA. It happens whether we like to acknowledge it or not. It happens. He talks about all of that, but he's also just very funny about his love life and about the way he views things. And he talks a lot about fashion in here also, which definitely was an added bonus for me. So this, Naturally Tan, was the funniest book I read in 2022. Moving on from the funniest, we're gonna go right into the saddest book I read in 2022. What made me cry the hardest? This one I think also is going to surprise you. It's The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman. I don't wish to spoil the ending of this book for you because I would love for you to go read it. But one of the things you need to understand about the Thursday Murder Club books, this one included, and I think this one even more so than the first one, is we do talk a lot about aging and death and the things that come along with that, like the degenerative conditions that you can develop as an older person, both physical and mental. And so there's just a lot to digest about that from an existential perspective. The last page of this book, I cried. Like full on, there were tears, ugly crying. It was gorgeous. Please, I've talked about this book twice. I need you to go read the Thursday Murder Club books. Like, they're so good. You will not regret it. Now, to cheer us up from discussing the saddest book of 2022, we're going to talk about the one that made me feel the best. The book that made me feel the best in 2022 was You Are the Medicine by Asha Frost. This book talks about various topics in terms of healing, healing trauma, healing the self, in terms of the 13 moons of the year. It's not here to hold your hand, and it's not here to coddle you. And we do talk a lot about racism and cultural appropriation in terms of what some would call new age thinking, which is actually very old age thinking for multiple cultures across the globe. This book really helped me in a lot of ways to confront and think about various areas of my life where I am trying to heal a lot of trauma. And having this as kind of a guide in that journey, I think has been very helpful. It's helped self-guide a lot of difficult discussions that I've had to have with myself about trauma and how I have perhaps traumatized others and, you know, coming to terms with various parts of my personality. And I think that that's all very important work to do. I think one of the best things that you can do in this world is come to terms with who you are as a person and really just come to understand yourself on a deeper level. So I highly recommend this book if you're looking to do some of that hard work with yourself. This is going to be the book that had the biggest impact on me in 2022, and that book was Medicine Walk by Richard Wagamese. In one of my last videos, in my December wrap-up, I talked about Medicine Walk and how it reminded me a lot of my grandfather, gave me a lot of insight into trauma and generational trauma and the things that make a person who they are and what takes them towards or away from their vices, and how that manifests in themselves and how it manifests in their relationships. Like, there was a lot of food for thought in this book, and especially like extrapolating this book out into the greater experiences that I have as a person. This book hit me super hard personally, just because I have that family connection to, like, I don't even know why I'm necessarily framing it that way. Like, the person that I'm talking about in my life was not an alcoholic, he was not an addict, but his traumas really shaped who he was, and it deeply affected all of his relationships. And we're never going to know the stories that really created him the way that he was, whereas in this book we get to understand how the father, Eldon, came to be the person that he is and how that ended up affecting his relationship with his son. There was just a lot to digest in this. So if you're looking for something a little bit more on the real side and you want something that's gonna like hit you right in the soul, definitely recommend Medicine Walk. All right, we are now in the home stretch. I'm going to tell you now about the worst book I read in 2022. I can imagine that a lot of you already know where we're going with this because I haven't exactly been quiet about it. But the worst book I read in 2022, and there were actually more contenders than I thought there were going to be. I had a lot of duds this year. The worst book I read in 2023, the one that generated the most ire in my soul, was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. Now, I know that there's a lot of people who are possibly going to come for me on this, but I have a really compelling argument from my perspective. This book discussed some really important topics. Domestic abuse is absolutely something that needs to be discussed. How domestic abuse plays out also needs to be something that's discussed. What this book did, in my opinion, was deeply disrespect an incredibly heavy topic by treating it with flippancy and marketing it as romance. I don't care how things with Atlas panned out at the end of this book. This is not a romance book. This book is about a woman in a terrible situation who, yes, she pulls herself out of it, and that's a really great concept for a story. But this treated it with so much flippancy in the tone, in the approach, and in the marketing. Okay. I'm gonna try not to rant about this, but I don't know if anybody saw the coloring book, the It Ends With Us coloring book that was slated for publication in the short term that has since been trashed because everybody decided to team up and tell them that it was a terrible idea. But like that level of flippancy and inattention to detail really sums up why this is my least favorite book of 2022. It is just so disrespectful to the subject matter that it's trying to deal with that, like, I simply cannot. This book was not it. Rant over. Sorry about that. This would be the part of the video where I go ahead and tell you about my favorite book of 2022. I am going to do something slightly different. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I read 48 books this year, which is the most I have ever read, and I read so many books that absolutely slapped this year. I have decided, rather than tell you my favorite book, we are going to choose it together in one of my next videos. We are going to do a 2022 book bracket wherein I am going to put all 48 of the books that I read this year head to head, and we're gonna pick my favorite book together from that bracket. But that is going to be for another video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am truly privileged to have spent so much of 2022 on YouTube with you all. It's been such a treat. I'm really proud of what I've been able to do so far this year, and I'm really excited to keep going in 2023 and see what else I can do this year. This is the part of the video where I tell you to go and follow me on all of my social media at Ink and Fig, except for my Instagram, on which I am Ink and Fig Reads. Go ahead and subscribe and hit the little bell if you have not yet so that you know when I upload, because the algorithm doesn't always like telling you what's going on. Leave me a comment and a like on this video if you feel so moved so that other people can find us also and come join the fun. Thank you once again so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.